Then the aliens, the Greys, tried another of their weird, kinky experiments on me before dropping me back in my bedroom. Nothing was disturbed except the pajamas I was wearing. Well, and myself, of course. Those were turned inside out, the pajamas. So, what are you going to do?
I have a podcast.
What's up, Hellspawn? That got away from me a little bit there, but it's all good. Welcome back to another episode of Spawnography. My name is George Marston. My pronouns are they, them, or she, her, and with me, as always, is...
Pierce Lyden, pronouns they, them. How you doing, George?
I'm on a pretty good day. Having a pretty good day. Let me put it that way. I didn't even have to use my AK.
Well, I didn't know I did a podcast with Ice Cube.
That's right. No, thank God you don't. Thank God neither of us do, I think. Just because he seems like a busy person, it'd be hard to schedule. I had a pretty good day today where by the time listeners hear this, the thing I worked on will be out, where I was making a listicle of the 25 best or most iconic Marvel Comics covers. And I had some editorial input on it from, my editors, but I also had some leeway on how I did it. And it's really fun to put together a list like that and just talk about cool comic art and have that be my job for a day.
So like Amazing Spider-Man 300.
Yes.
Spider-Man number 1.
Didn't quite
Spider-Man number
make the
2.
cut. Didn't quite
Spider-Man
make the cut.
Number 3.
Didn't quite make the cut.
Spider-Man number 4.
Didn't quite make the cut.
Hulk 340.
On there.
We gotta listen. Gotta get Todd on there.
He's on there twice, baby. I went with 300 and Incredible Hulk 340, which are both great covers. Honestly, with only 25 slots, there's only so much you can do. What's interesting about that is, while my opinions are reflected in an article that are hosted on the website Newsarama, Newsarama's opinions are not reflected in this podcast by anything I say.
That's interesting.
Isn't it? That's how the magic happens. That's how the sausage gets made.
It's very funny because you sent me that list, and I know that part of a list of like best covers ever is their iconography. And sometimes things are iconic just because of what's inside them. So people start to associate the cover with what's inside. Amazing Fantasy 15 is an okay cover, in my opinion. But
you think so? Well,
I think it's an okay cover.
Okay.
But more of the modern covers, honestly, like like New Avengers #1, for instance. I mean, it is the first ever New Avengers volume. So in a way, it's like, well, this is the beginning of this as a franchise in a weird way.
I think a lot of what makes that one sort of an iconic cover is that it gets repeated a lot.
Yeah.
And that's also true of Amazing Spider-Man 300. You see new versions of that pose all the time.
Spawn 300.
Exactly, by the master himself, the Todd Father. Speaking of which, in more Spawn-related news and related to other hobbies that I have and you and I occasionally share, I did wind up ordering that Todd McFarlane and original OG Spawn design.
Oh shit! Can I still do that? I got to do that.
Yeah, I think you can. I think it's still on sale. Well, by the time listeners hear this, I doubt it will be, but by the time we're talking about it, it's still on sale. Mine should get here tomorrow, and I'm pretty happy to have that. I don't have much in the way of Spawn stuff, despite hosting this podcast. I have some comics, of course, but most of my collection, as listeners probably understand by now, is Marvel stuff. and a
Yeah.
little bit of DC. My roommate, and then I have a bunch of other shit. But in terms of comic stuff, but it's nice to have what I think is a cool representation of my love for Spawn and my growing love for Spawn, which
Kind
is
of, it's kind of a representation of our podcast in a way.
yeah, it's like the two of us in some ways. You can picture us as a vague simulacrum of Todd McFarlane and an early rendering of one of his greatest creations. Who is who? That is up to the listener to
Depends on the
envision.
day. Depends
Yeah,
on the day.
also true. Also
I,
true.
I feel like listeners would probably, and not because we do the voices, but decide that we're Sam's or Twitches on any given day.
Yeah, that's true.
There are days where I'm more of a Sam going on tangents, and you're more of a Twitch keeping us on track, and vice versa. So
And then there are days where I'm Sam eating on the toilet, like on this comic. No, I've never actually done that. I've never eaten on the toilet, thank God.
I am eating on the toilet right now.
I know, which is making it really hard to record this podcast because you have to edit out a lot of weird mouth sounds.
That's why we're not a video podcast. People have asked,
That's right.
but that's why.
People have asked because Pierce records on the toilet while eating.
It gives
every
me the best
week.
acoustics.
That's true. That's true. It's God damn it, it's true. You're right. I've never thought about it, but that is the secret.
You got to record in the shower.
That's right.
This week we got 2 issues of Spawn, which I'm pretty happy to be back to the main Spawn book. Partly because I've been in Curse of the Spawn editing hell, and also,
brother.
and that's mostly because I was annoying during our Curse of Spawn episodes.
We recorded, honestly, some of those. We talked a lot about what was going on before the issues even started. And it's always hard to dive into something that requires a lot of context, or which I think requires a lot of context given the way we analyze stuff kind of on a critical level. And we may dip in and out of there again, and there are some parts of it that we'll probably cover down the road. Those couple episodes were an experiment, and we tried a couple things with them. But I'm, like you said, very glad to be back on Spawn Classic.
100%. Original flavor Spawn.
That's right. Now, these do feel a little bit different from the Spawn of old. I have to say they feel like they might be influenced by Curse of Spawn just a little bit in their tone and content. And also they feel very much like post-HBO episodes. Like
100%.
They feel like they
100%.
came out during or after, part of the run, after that was getting very popular. Seems like these 2 issues in particular were geared at people who might be picking up Spawn after enjoying some episodes of the animated series.
Yeah, and that's very similar to what we said about the Jessica Priest situation in general. Is like, if these are going to be the books that are on the shelves, then we want to appeal to the folks that are seeing the movies, that are seeing the HBO show. These 2 issues, I mean, I don't hate them. They're fine.
No, there are parts of them
fine.
I really like. There are parts of them that I was like, ugh, and we'll get to those. Some of them for various reasons. And what's kind of good and interesting about them, they kind of fly by a little bit. There's a good chunk of 67 that feels like a 1-act play, like something that you put on when you're like in your second year of college and you're a theater major and you're like, think you're really pushing a boundary.
I mean, I think a lot of Todd's writing kind of feels like amateur dramatists writing often. So that tracks.
I have to say, I love your no notes hat. I saw on Instagram, Sarah Benincasa, who's a wonderful writer and comedian, wearing that same hat and also advertising or showing off, anyway, I won't say advertising, but showing off a sign that she had hanging on her wall made by the same person that said, "Read more, write better." And all I could think of was like, you think if I read Shakespeare, I'm going to write better? And
actually, yes.
Yeah, maybe
Maybe.
so. Could be. Um, let's get into it. Hit me with the credits for Spawn number 67.
Todd McFarlane and Image Comics presents Homeland. Story by Todd McFarlane, pencils by Greg Capullo, inks by Todd McFarlane and Chance Wolfe, copy editor and lettering by Tom Warzakowski, colors by Brian Haberlin and Dan Kemp, dedicated to a legend, Garib Sheamus.
Oh, wow. For
Yeah.
those of you who don't know, Gareb Sheamus was the founder and editor-in-chief of Wizard, the comics magazine, which was basically the staple of 90s comics journalism. There are a few others out there. The Comics Journal, of course, I think. Heroes Illustrated. There are a bunch of other ones, but Wizard was the one you read if you were cool and hip and you had a rude attitude.
Yeah, if you had a Super Nintendo in the back pocket of your Jinkos, you were reading Wizard Magazine in the other back pocket of
100%.
your
It was a
Jinkos.
Sega on one side, a Genesis for me, but it was definitely 30 issues of Wizard Magazine in the other. I still have a big long box of them. But yeah, Gareb Sheamus. We could get into more of the history of that, but that's a whole other podcast. Needless to say,
There is
Wizard.
one.
There is. That's
There,
right.
yeah, and I hope to have them on as guests on the show at some point. But there is a great Wizard Magazine podcast that I will find the name of because I can't remember it right now, and I will recommend it at the end of this episode.
Perfect.
So you have to listen to the whole thing if that's what you want to really find out about, or you can, I guess, skip ahead.
But Wizard Magazine and Spawn and Todd McFarlane and Image Comics all together had a really strong relationship because Wizard kind of started around the time that Image was starting, and they really made they did a lot of promotion together. Honestly, Wizard, big part of the reason that my career is comic journalist, and the opinions of the site where I do all that comic journalizing are not reflected in this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, also for me, my start in comics, my boss at Marvel used to work at Wizard. So
yeah,
actually, both of my bosses at Marvel used to work at Wizard. So
honestly, if we went down the list, there's a lot of guys who worked at Wizard that have come up in the industry since, very deservingly so in a lot of cases, and a lot of cool names out there. Yeah, Wizard Magazine. It was a cool part of my youth.
pretty cringe to read some of the issues now.
Yeah, I mean,
because it was very like teenage boy focused, pretty misogynistic.
Yeah,
but it was a moment in time.
Much like these issues of Spawn are in many ways a moment in time for a lot of the same very prurient reasons.
Yeah, yeah. So we're going to get into it. We're going to open with there have been a lot of storms in New York, and Sam and Twitch are fumbling for some batteries.
Because it's a blackout.
As well, I don't think it's a blackout. I think that their building is so shitty that the power is out.
Well, that's still a blackout in their building.
I mean, in their building, but blackout.
Okay, sure.
I would say blackout.
Riots in the streets.
Listen, having lived through one New York City blackout in 2003, blackout is more like citywide and it gets real weird. It means you can like ride your bike to all the local delis and they'll give you ice cream for free because it's going to melt otherwise.
We would use that a little more fluidly in the South. Like, we had a blackout last night at the house. But we live a little more separately a lot of the time, not as much in apartment buildings or like big swaths. But I think you're right that what's going on here is the power in their apartment building or their office building, rather, where they have their shitty rat heap of an office is out. And Sam, as usual, didn't buy any batteries. But thank God for them, and dear God, no for us. The power comes back on quickly as we get to the next page, and it's one of the weirdest, like, definitely most 90s teen boy humor, like, pages of all time, because it's Sam, what are we just talking about, sitting on the toilet, eating a giant hoagie, and he says, not many people have the skill to eat a loaf and pinch one at the same time, which made me retch. when I read it
It's
sitting on my couch.
it's so far one of the worst Sam. I'll put it up there as the worst Sam line so far.
And then there's a burp and a plop sound effect just for good measure.
Thanks,
There's
Tom.
also like naked ladies posted all over the inside of this bathroom. I don't know. He's tying a lot of human impulses together in this panel. Greg Capullo rendering the hell out of it.
I mean, you start to wonder why Twitch is his friend.
It's, some people have those kind of friends, and I think in some ways it's a very strong caricature of real life friendships. Like, I'm not very fucking organized at all. I don't know what I'm doing at any point in my life unless someone tells me. And when we hang out,
I have spreadsheets about our recording schedule for the next at least a month.
exactly. And so in our own way, you are Sam because you're still eating on the toilet as we speak about that. No, you are not doing that. Just to be clear for the spies.
They're not going to believe you.
Looking for intel. I'll clear it up right now. Pierce is eating on the toilet. No, but that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of very classic dynamic. There's Laurel and Hardy, and that kind of straight man, funny man, honeymooners. Yeah, exactly. 100%. Odd couple, 100%. But not all of those guys are just visibly shitting while eating a fucking hero.
The worst panel on the page is him wiping his ass.
Oh God, because that is what it is, isn't it? Yes. Let's just go ahead and say it. That is a terrifyingly bad to understand panel, but at the same time, I gotta give it up to Greg Capullo for totally selling exactly what's happening with only showing about a half of Sam's face and his upper shoulder. We all know what it is. Oh man. Wow. I just gotta say, they had fun drawing this page.
Yeah, and I hope so.
Someone had to have fun in somewhere in this process. I mean, I guess I'm having fun talking about it, but for sure, when I read it, I was legitimately just a little bit like put off. Like, oh no, this is so much. Well, they find the batteries for their flashlight, and they say they're going to go out and find Cagliostro. But just as they're leaving, Mrs. Bird, a kooky client who just so happens to pay them a lot of money to investigate her claims of aliens, arrives. Sam hides in the bathroom, again, presumably to finish the sandwich, I guess. Twitch tries to deal with her, but we get that whole monologue about her pajamas and the aliens, and finally, Twitch kind of bails.
I kind of like that he ditches Sam and is just like, you deal with this because I do this all the time.
This is, I have an idea, and she's knocking on the door. This is a very like 90s sitcom kind of moment. Even 80s sitcom. This really feels like some Perfect Strangers type shit.
Oh, yeah. I have a question for you. In the compendium, in the panel with where she says, come on out, your pal said you want to handle this. Who's in the is there a person in that picture frame?
I think it's Ricky Martin.
Is it Ricky?
Is that who that is?
It's Vanilla Ice.
Oh no, that is Vanilla Ice. Oh my God. You know what did it? There's a glare that's superimposed on the image that just slightly made his face look different to me. But you're right. That is Vanilla.
So there's that.
That is the lyrical gangster.
Yeah.
That's wow.
Why do they have that?
Well, I would just have to assume that Sam or Twitch or both are big fans of the music of old Rob Van Winkle. You know what it is? Did you ever go to like a state fair or anything like that in the 90s or earlier?
We didn't really have state fairs. We had Italian feasts.
Okay, I've been to the Italian feast, which is it's incredible.
Yeah.
But it's not like a state fair.
No, but there are funnel cakes and rides.
A state fair has more games where there are like long booths of like people throwing darts and shit like that, and like put the water in the clown's mouth and stuff.
Mhm.
Well, in the 90s, a lot of the time the prizes you could get were just framed pictures of celebrities, especially ones that were about 10 years old and faded by the sun because they'd had them since they opened the first shutters for the first time in 1991. But you'd see some of the ones you'd see would definitely be Vanilla Ice. Newer ones, you'd see a lot of Cartman and South Park characters. I
Yeah, that
think I
makes
had
sense.
one. Anyway, a
Feels like there
Southern
would be a
State
Spawn
Fair,
one.
county fair, there probably was a lot of Spawn shit back in the day. Honestly, you know what you should do? It's going to be about a year before it happens again, but come down for the fair in the fall next time,
All
and
right.
we'll go, and you'll have a wild kitschy time.
Great. I'm going to
Anyway,
eat so many fried Oreos.
oh hell yeah.
Anyway, this
So
lady keeps saying that she got abducted by aliens. Sam and Twitch don't believe her. Sam has to deal with her. We cut back to Rat City, where the night people are having a who can have the longest spit droplet
yeah,
contest, which
trying
is
to
definitely a thing.
hang,
Yeah, definitely a thing you do when you're 12.
yeah, or younger, trying to hang your loogie as low as you can go and suck it back up without accidentally hawking in dirt, which is disgusting. And again, I was like, boy, this is like a Sandlot type moment. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah,
that kind of like boys being boys having fun, but instead it's a bunch of stinky old men in an alley laying in the trash because
yeah.
it's Rat City and they live in not the Bowery but Bowery, which will
A
become up
single
again.
Bowery.
Yeah, I said Central Park.
So
But they're all marveling over this guy's ability to hawk his loogie, and he starts praising Lord Jesus Christ for his spit sucking powers.
right, and this leads to a sort of good versus evil religious debate between the night people. There's a new guy here, John, who is basically like,
He doesn't believe in any of it.
he's just like, I'm gonna get out of here. I don't like you treat this as a life sentence. This doesn't have to be your life. You guys
Yeah,
just don't even try anymore. So this is why it's your life. Which, here's one thing that I do kind of like about this is that we never really get to see the dynamic of the night people. We've never seen ones that are not happy to be there, unfortunately. Like,
yeah.
not that they're all happy to be there, but this at
That
least puts
they
kind
get
of in it.
into their contentment.
Yeah. Yeah. They're usually just like drinking and having fun. They're not really like lamenting their place in the world.
But I gotta say, I love the cartooning on John. He looks like a Popeye character or something. There's a very Jack Kirby esque kind of
Mm.
quality to the shape of his face and his fat fingers around his bottle. I really love it. He looks
He
great.
kind of reminded me of like Tintin.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in there. Just that classic cartooning of like just a mook. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Just a Goomba, kind of like a tough, like a ruffian, and he looks great. Great cartooning by the one of the masters in this era for sure, King Capullo. Also, the cartooning on Julio, his face is really kind of lived. Like
Yeah.
I like all of it.
I
This
think
is
the
the part. Go
inking's
ahead.
good too. And really
Yes,
helps it out,
the
actually. It really,
inking
really
is
brings it out.
great. And this is again Chance Wolf, right?
And Todd.
And Todd, of course, yes. That's what I thought. But it's so funny how you read the credits to me, and then 3 seconds later, I'm like, and this is like, but it's just my memory.
In fairness, we've been talking for 2 hours. So
That's right. Well, this is the part that I really like. This whole sequence where they get into the nature of good and evil and all this kind of stuff, and it's Bootsy, right, or Bobby, that is showing this thing he has from his daughter, which is a little crystal figure that she gave him the last time she saw him after she got clean off drugs. Told him if he ever got clean that it was a reminder to come and find her of what was awaiting for him. It's this really sweet thing.
It's
And
pretty
John,
heartbreaking, actually, like,
it is.
because also it really speaks to the idea that, like, yes, sometimes people can't help themselves, you know? And I think that
Yeah, it
everybody's had
does.
those people in their lives that they understand that, like, Bootsy is clear about what's wrong in his life,
Yeah.
and he knows what he needs to do to fix it. And
I
he is sort of,
gotta.
oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm just saying, like, it's this very, like, kind of sweet moment of, I can't get there. I just can't
Yeah.
get there. And it's a little heartbreaking. And this is the part of the issue that I actually really like.
Yeah. I gotta give it up and say Todd kind of wrote about this in a very gentle way that I was like, oh, this is kind of tough, but in a way that like feels very much like I said, it feels like a one act play that was written by someone who really gives a shit. Where it's just these guys in an alley having a conversation and an experience together. And they get into, after talking about why are they there, are they going to stay there, are they waiting for a miracle, they get into good and evil. And he says, because one of the guys, the guy who was hanging his spit real low, is a very committed Christian apparently and is preaching the word of God. And John says that he doesn't believe in any of it. It's all horseshit. Spawn steps out and he kind of tells him, mind your own business. And he says a word that I think is meant to mean ghost. But here again, Spawn, who is a black man, is
It's,
pretty tough.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, I'll give it
Yeah. We have a
credit
few,
that
we have a few moments in this issue, or these two issues, that,
yeah.
yeah.
I'll give credit that I'm sure what's meant here is to refer to him as, in a kind of irreverent way, as a ghost, like as a dismissive,
Yeah.
because he
I think that's what it is. And it is not,
in 2024, almost 2025, it comes off a little bit, yeah,
it's not taking into context the historical
right.
aspects of that word, but
But John says, Spawn says, why is that? And he says, mind your own business. And John says, fine. You know what makes me puke about religion? It's the separation. If you ain't good enough or you don't follow a certain set of rules, then boom, you're done. Banished into an eternal hell, one considered to be the worst possible fate a human could have imposed on him, or at least the most horrible things them damned prophets could think of. See, I think people who pray to unseen forces are stupid. That's it. Just plain old ignorant. But believers, they go way beyond that. They accept their God will torture and punish the soul, in ways too horrible to imagine. And he goes on and he makes an analogy about like an elephant and a grandma. And but the point he makes is also a very late 90s kind of like edgy atheism, like dogma kind of like monologue about the nature of religion and why he doesn't identify with it.
I do think, though, that he has a little bit of a point if you're 13.
Well, for sure. I mean, he has a kind of a point if I'm 41. You know what I mean? Like, he kind of has a point,
Sure.
which is, very real to some people that, like, it doesn't make sense, the rules that are imposed through religion. And he says, and the last time I checked, God's the one who discriminates. If you don't bend a knee, then it's off to Satan you go. But I've yet to hear the devil reject anyone. Never heard him say, I'm sorry, sir, but it appears you're too good for us. Nope, his door is open to anyone, anytime. He doesn't care who or what you are. Everyone's accepted. Seems like it's the devil who might be a little more generous with his judgment. So what do you think now, Spawn? And this whole monologue to Spawn is basically like all that shit Johnny Storm says to Cassandra Nova and Deadpool and Wolverine, where he's just like, she can lick my fucking whatever. And it's like this long, horrible monologue that pushes every button. And to Spawn, this much must feel like this poor, dumb bastard. And that leads to a version of Spawn that I actually think is the first time we're really seeing this, which is a Spawn who suddenly is speaking authoritatively about good and evil, about God and Satan and heaven and hell, and about his place in it all, in a way that it seems like he's finally taken some of Cog's lessons.
He
And I think I
finally
owe it.
knows something. He finally knows something more than somebody else. This is almost the first time in the entirety of the book that he's actually known something and had to educate someone.
And I'll go ahead and I'll owe it to Spawn to say his side of it. He says, there was a time when I believed just like you did that life is just about today, but that changed when they turned me into what I am now. I guarantee you there's good and evil, and each takes many forms. Blah, 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 blah. The answer, as far as I can tell, lies somewhere between the black and white stereotypes we've been taught about heaven and hell. It's a gray area that everything lives in, where neither God nor Satan is truly good or evil, and that's what makes it all the more chilling. Not because they control us, but because they don't. Not really. These outside forces give us options, but they don't decide. We do. We create our own judgment days. And this is it. I hope Cagliostro overheard this, because if he did, he'd be slapping his forehead and going, fucking finally, you understand what I've been telling you. There is no good or evil. There are just forces beyond our comprehension that categorize themselves that way according to their whims, and they will sweep you up in it. What you do once they put you in that position is still on your shoulders. And it's something that we will suddenly see Spawn start to act on in 1 second. The trajectory of that is not going to go so great for reasons still undetermined.
There's no good or evil. There's only the choices that you make, has been the not like theology of the book, but the sort of
I mean, it in some ways, like,
I
not the.
guess yeah, I mean, theology is the wrong word, but it's the moral outlook of the book. I think is that there is no good or evil. There is only the choices that you make and how it affects other people. And yeah, it's great. I actually really like this issue because it does give Spawn a foundation that I think if you were a new reader because you saw the show, it does fall a little bit more in line with what Alan McElroy establishes there, because it condenses so much of Spawn's early days into something that is a little bit more palatable. I don't know if it works as much with the movie, but I think for the
Right.
show, for fans of the show, it definitely works. And I think if you're a savvy fan who's able to parse that, like, these interpretations are going to all be a little bit different, but they're kind of all the same, then you're having a good time.
I think if you are picking up this comic because you want to get to know Spawn for the first time, this is one of the things that most first issues in an arc do, which is it lays out what Spawn is and what it's about again. But this time, for maybe the first time in this context, maybe only the second time ever really overall, it's giving Spawn the agency in telling that story. And that's so much more gripping as a reader to get it from him going like, I'm here making choices in this world, and I have to do that in the face of forces beyond my comprehension, just like you do, and the consequences for us are the same. It puts a connection between Spawn and the reader that is more about what Spawn is doing and who he is and where he's going and what his plans are than in the position of the reader as a questioner and someone who is unaware of what Spawn is about. And I think that's a much more effective intro. It at least switches things up a bit. I think it also kind of shows a little bit of the beauty of Spawn, of him finally getting that. And it kind of shows Todd finally kind of being able to have Spawn say that as the writer, I think is actually a big step forward. And I think it kind of, in this moment, more than many others, that opinion and that worldview reflects something that Todd McFarlane actually feels and believes. And I think what that is, like I said, you have to make choices in this life. And there are forces that are outside of your control that are going to influence your life, and you still have to make choices. And you still have to make decisions in the face of that. And those things are going to come whether or not you are deciding. So you better man up and figure it out.
Yeah, and also even further than that, that the choices you make do not entirely define you as good or evil because they are choices that you have to make. There are times that you can be a good person and make a choice that is maybe it's a selfish choice that is in your best interest, but not in everybody's best interest. And similarly, you might consider yourself maybe you've been on a run of bad choices and then you make a good one, you know,
Yeah.
and so it's hard to define. It's hard to define good and evil, and I think in the world of Spawn, especially, it is.
There's also just a level of acceptance in it for Al, who has to every day of his on life existence grapple with the fact that the choices he made as a person are what led to him being in hell in the first place, to have to make the decision of whether to go back and see Wanda, whatever the cost. And I think to have Spawn himself say this is a level of acceptance that we haven't seen in him yet, that I hope leads to growth.
Spawn's very much about when we make choices, do we consider the cost?
Right.
And I actually think that's kind of poignant and important. And it's not a way that people think about the choices that they make in their lives. You know,
Yeah. It,
there's an
it
impulsiveness to Al's decision when Malbolgia gives him that deal because there is one thing that he wants. He does not consider. It's a little bit the genie thing of like, oh, I'm going to grant your wishes, but I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to like grant them.
well, in a way, it's Spawn's response to the mantra of "with great power must also come great responsibility," which is with every choice comes cause and effect. With every choice, you have to live with what comes. So you have to consider the outcome. I
In
guess
a
that's what it would
way,
be. Consider the outcome, you know?
in a way, it's the original One More Day.
It kind of is. And that's maybe why One More Day, not so great a story, because it sells it all short. You know what
One
I
More
mean?
Day, I think a bad story that leads to that opens up things for great stories. I think we've already talked about One More
Yeah,
Day. I'm not
Brand
going
New
to do that
Day,
again.
some great comics. I did a whole review of every issue of the Brand New Day era. Good stuff. That's
Yeah,
what I'll
a
say.
lot of fun. Anyway,
Back in the world of Spawn and Rat City, John's leaving the alley and he slaps out of Bobby's hand his little crystal deer. It's like a doe. And you know the other
yeah,
thing about this is
kind of a Blade Runner reference. It feels like
a little bit, and
it's
also
Bobby losing his humanity a little bit.
it is. I'll buy that for sure, especially with the close up on it shattering and everything.
Yeah,
It also hits slightly home for me because I am, as you would describe, a tchotchke American, and my
same.
mother is also a tchotchke American. I come by it honestly.
Yeah,
And when I was a kid, especially when we used to take trips or something, or we'd have a nice experience together, she'd always commemorate it by giving me a little figurine like that. And there was one time where she gave me like a mama deer and like a baby deer together. And it just hits home a little bit to know how much just a little thing like that can mean when, especially when it's all you have.
it's creating the divide between how John sees himself and how the rest of the night people see their own humanity.
Yeah.
You know, he says how he has this thing and his daughter gave it to him, and he knows that he's got his way out, but also he does also know that he's loved in a certain way because he holds on to this little thing. I
And
think what
this,
we're supposed to insinuate is also that he doesn't feel that he's good enough to
yeah.
make the changes to be the person that the person who gave him this thing um, wants him to be, and that's very real. That's extremely real for people who struggle
Yeah.
with so many different things,
So many
and
different things. Exactly.
and
The,
it's to lose it here and the worst part about that panel of it shattering is the kiss um,
Yeah,
logo
because you
being
can
in
hear.
there.
Yeah, that's true. Oh
But
my god.
but um,
Do you think
yeah,
there was a like they had a contract mandated thing where they had to have the Kiss
no.
logo in each
I think
issue of
that
Spawn?
Orzechowski just has fun because well, look, we saw the Creech logo. We see
Fair.
we see TMP a lot, like Timp,
Yeah.
but that's Todd McFarlane Productions.
Right.
We see
Yeah, of
that
course.
pretty frequently. So I think it's just Orzechowski having fun. I think also in this case, it if you notice it, it does take away from it a little bit because it's a really sad moment. And I think that we're probably adding a little bit more weight to it than readers were at the time.
I
But
don't know because what comes next is pretty freaking heartbreaking. This panel of him saying, "Please not this, goddamn you, John, look what you've done. My crystal, I'm sorry, Susie, it wasn't my fault." Like
yeah,
it doesn't flower it up. Like that's just
that's true.
heartbreaking as he scrapes up the pieces, and then we get these great angry eyes from Spawn as he's like, "You motherfucker, you
It's the
fucked with
Chance
my
Wolf page
friend."
all the way, baby.
Absolutely. And he says, "You gonna be okay, Bobby?" The religious guy, and Bobby says, "I always am. That's the good thing about where we're at. It's tough to go any lower because as far as the world's concerned, we're already at the bottom. Who cares what I feel?" And I mean, look, here's the thing: when you hate yourself in some way, that's a very real feeling. Who cares what I feel? It doesn't matter because it won't change anything because I'm not good enough to change anything. And anyone who has made changes in their life for the better can tell you that there comes a moment where you're probably feeling something like that. It's just a real heartbreaking scene of emotion. And then Julio's response.
Yeah, I know. Where he says, like, "Will you listen to yourself? What you gonna do now? Sit there feeling sorry for yourself? Well, why don't you just end your misery?" Trigger warning here. He basically tells him to end his own life,
If he
and
really thinks he's worthless.
yeah, and he says, but you won't. Know why? Because you're like me that way. You're afraid, and you're holding out for one faint hope we all have that a miracle will happen, turning us back into real people again. And those three panels of Spawn, it's Spawn in the background of turning us back into real people again. And then he leaves, and then we just see fire, and it's
It's a
great.
it's another powerful moment. And again, is the language the most sensitive
No,
therapeutic
it's not.
language? No, but it's not mean spirited. I think, again, it's a relatable response to what he's saying. It's kind of that feeling of rock bottom. And in a way, it feels like Spawn is coming off of rock bottom here. We didn't bring it up because we didn't really recap what happened previously, but we're coming off of Spawn having his face restored, his real Al
Yeah.
Simmons face restored, and wasting his chance to come face to face with Wanda again in his real human form, or as close to it as he's ever been since dying, on a mission of petty, worthless, in the end, futile revenge that just costs him the window he has of his face. And he's
Yeah.
coming off of that, which has to feel like rock bottom for him.
Especially because he doesn't even have a plan for what he would do if he did see her with his face. He
No,
doesn't know what
and
he would do. He has no
Terry
idea.
even is like, then tell her. You're going to tell her right now. He calls his bluff.
Incredible scene. Incredible scene.
The writing on the emotional writing on this series has gotten really next level in these last few issues, and there's been some levity to break it up in a way. I'm gonna name something extremely divisive here, and I'll explain why.
Okay.
In some ways it reminds me of Thor Love and Thunder, and what I mean by that is I'm not comparing the quality. You'll understand what I mean and why I'm making this comparison.
Okay.
Okay, that is a silly movie. That is a silly comedy movie. And that is the main thrust of the first 3/4 of that film, is that no joke is left untold, no laugh is left unsearched for. Whether you love it or hate it, that is the kind of movie it is. It's a comedy movie. And then you get to that scene where Jane Foster is dying and there are just no fucking jokes at all. and it's very sad. And it almost starts to feel like every stupid, silly punchline was a build up to that moment. And whether that's effective or not, whether you like that movie or not, whether you think that's a good choice for that or any movie, beside the point, that structurally feels like the purpose of having fucking Sam shitting and eating at the same time and belching and snelching and all the fucking stupid alien shit in the first half of or first act of this comic to lead up to these people who are crying out for humanity to each other, to a God who Al Simmons can confirm does not hear them or care. And there's real tragedy in that that is thankfully unbroken by switching back to like Sam shitting or something.
I don't think that this book loses anything by just losing the humor, because the
No,
humor
I don't think it does. I think it's
be,
good.
and I actually think that like the stuff with the night people being forefronted, I think it would have really thrust readers into a little bit of a different mindset. Yeah, you're right. Cutting back to Sam and Twitch, who unfortunately, as much as I love them both, and I miss, and we've said this many times on this podcast, like we miss when they're not around because they don't bring that other level to the story. And Todd sometimes goes like not grim dark. He just like loves Frank Miller too much, and we just get captions on captions on captions about bullshit that we
Right.
don't actually care about. And here I'm like, this isn't captions. This is people. These are people talking.
I was just thinking that same thing. Yeah.
It's great, and I want that at the front of the book. The Sam and Twitch stuff in this case, yeah, if you want to use it as like a palate cleanser to bring you back up after you've been brought way, 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 way down, sure. But
it feels like stage setting to earn this moment. Whether this moment needs to
yeah,
be earned in that way is another question.
I think I just like talked myself into agreeing with you, even though I wasn't agreeing with you at the top because you brought up a movie that I hate and I'll
Fair
never
enough.
watch
I know
again.
you hate that movie, and I didn't bring it up because
It's
I
okay.
thought you liked it or was trying to make you like it, but because I think it does the same kind of thing of front loading a lot of funny humor, successful or not,
I think
to
this is more successful than that was.
oh, this is a more successful, yeah, sure. Whatever, yeah, I'll give you that. I don't care. I'm not trying to defend an extremely divisive movie. I don't
Listen,
care about that.
I know that if you defend Thor: Love and Thunder enough, they give you kickbacks.
I wish they did. I'd happily do it. I really enjoyed that movie. You know, the funny thing is, I'll just, while we're talking about it once and for all, I'll just say I saw that movie at a point when I was really, really low and depressed. And seeing a very silly, lighthearted, honestly, a romantic comedy, kind of like The Princess
Mhm.
Bride,
Totally.
really worked for me in that moment.
Okay. Listen,
I
respect for
can't
that.
defend it as a like great Thor movie. In many ways, I think it'd probably be a better movie if it was like just different fantasy characters that Taika Waititi created. But
You're not
there
wrong.
there would be no expectation with it.
Yeah.
But that's all. That's my feeling on it. I can't defend it to anybody who hates it. I get it. I have a soft spot for it because it hit me in a cool way at a time when I was sad. And that's the thing, is that this is a much better and more human approach to conveying some of those emotions to me.
Yeah.
We just related so much to everything these characters said in different ways. We talked about a conversation for like a good chunk, the better part of an hour, really, at this point. And I
Yeah.
think that is a testament to the quality of this writing and of these scenes, that it's making us like really feel something that calls forth something in our soul. And of course, you know, Todd McFarlane saying all this coming off the back of the death of his father-in-law, coming off of seeing at this point basically the highest heights that you can reach in his field at the same time of seeing these emotional lows. And I think
Mhm.
that's impacting the level and quality of his writing because he's really tapping into that human feeling. And over the course of now 60 something plus issues based on, extras and stuff, he's really figuring out how to do that as a writer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't mean to just say, yeah, absolutely, so that we can move on, but we do need to move on.
Yeah, of course, of course.
This kind of cuts to John with his boys, and they're going to knock over a pawn shop. That's their plan. And we won't speak about some of the language used here
Yeah,
on
they
these 2 pages. It's not
basically
great.
John is telling his friends, what's his name? I'm sorry, Julio. Yes, Julio there is with him, which makes kind of what he's saying a little bit chilling because he's saying that they're going to frame one of the other night people for what's happening, and you suddenly realize that they're kind of probably going to frame Julio, who's there with them,
Yep, 100%.
and that's gosh sucks for Julio. Spawn shows up, and yeah, John calls him a slur. Eh, it's
Technically calls his costume a slur.
sure, whatever. He
I'm
says the
kidding.
F slur to insult Spawn, and I am going to discuss it just slightly. I'm not going to say
Sure.
it because I don't feel like that's a good idea, and I don't want to. But this is now like kind of the third or fourth time,
Third, at
yeah,
least the third.
that it's come up, and I'm just like, I know it was one of the like slurs that was okay to say in the 90s. It was not okay to say in the 90s, but there was a perception that it was not on the same level as other slurs that are like violent and hurtful in the way that many people would feel this way word is now when used this way, myself included. So I'm a little over it. You know what I mean? I feel like we can move past it. Hopefully, he'll find another way to call Spawn names. So Spawn confronts them, and he's like, you know, don't go do all this shit. Like I said, we choose what we become. And he says, you think I'm going to completely abandon those people I've been forced to live with? Why are you so eager to betray them? And he says, because I look out for number one, which is literally what Peter Parker says at the most selfish moment of his life.
True. True.
And he says, I didn't create alienation. It's been around since forever, since religion started. Why should I fight it? And Spawn calls him a hypocritical coward.
Love that panel.
Yep. And what happens next is unexpected because John unloads his gun into Spawn and his costume doesn't react. Spawn is very confused. The readers are confused. We
No
don't know why this is
tendrils,
happening. Nothing. And even as Spawn continues threatening him, Johnny just blows him away. This panel of all of his buddies pulling out their guns around him. I love Johnny's face in that panel and the next one. They just fill Spawn full of lead, and down he goes. Johnny says, how's it feel to be on the receiving end for a change? As Spawn lays there in his own necroplasm. Sucks,
Yep.
don't it? Spawn says, go screw yourself. Johnny says some last shit, and oof. He says, what's the last thing that goes to a fly's mind when he hits a windshield? It's his ass. Say goodnight to your prayer, or say your prayers. Good night. Say goodnight to your prayers. Say goodnight to your prayers. And then he blows him away. He shoots a big hole in the back of his head. And that panel of him blowing his brains out that's just a panel of Spawn's
Cool.
head collapsing from behind. Kind of dope. So,
That leads us to Spawn number 68. Todd McFarlane Image Comics presents Intersection. Story by Todd McFarlane. Pencils by Greg Capullo. Inks by Todd McFarlane, Chance Wolfe. Copy editor and lettering by Tom Warskowski. Colors by Brian Haberlin and Dan Kemp. And dedicated to Mike DeLuca.
oh,
I don't actually know who Mike DeLuca is.
I think I do, but I don't want to get it wrong. So you look it up.
Oh, he's a film studio executive.
Ah,
He worked at New Line and DreamWorks. He's been nominated for 3 Best Picture Oscars from Brooklyn, so that's
Mike
good.
DeLuca. Okay,
He was
yeah,
he
that's
was a
about what I thought.
writer on Freddy's Nightmares. Made his debut in the film industry as an associate producer on Leatherface, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. He wrote In the Mouth of Madness.
Great movie.
That movie fucking rules. But he also co-wrote Judge Dredd in 1995.
And that movie fucking rules. No, that is a weird movie.
It's a weird movie that is bad because Rob Schneider's in it.
That's
Um,
true. And honestly, fuck Sylvester Stallone.
the
Yeah.
first release under his production company was Ghost Rider, starring Nicolas Cage.
So this guy's making hits.
He also oversaw a variety of films that would come to define the studio at New Line, including Seven, Friday, Boogie Nights, Austin Powers, Rush Hour, Blade, Magnolia, and American History X.
So some incredible movies. It's funny you say seven first. It's funny you say seven first because this first scene here with Sam and Twitch in the crime scene feels so much like the opening part of Seven to me.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
definitely.
just like we'll get into it. The opening page is a splash page, a literal splash page of Spawn's worm-eaten brains flying across the page. And just a little bit of recap about Spawn following John and getting blown away because he went into some part of the alley that we don't know about yet.
Yeah, and like what's crazy about this for folks who have I guess not really read Spawn but have watched Spawn is that he seems pretty impervious to bullets most of the time.
Right.
So,
And so that's why it's very bewildering for everyone.
yeah. Including
Um,
us.
I like this page, this next page of the sequential shot of the gun, blam, 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 and then the door, bam, bam, bam. Not the first time we've had that. There was that comparison. There was the issue where the guy gets taken out of his family's house and shot by Tony Twist
Yeah,
in the back
similar
of the head.
setup.
Same bam, bam, bam on the door, blam, blam, blam in the head. This is one of those Capullo classic, like repeating motif sequential images where Sam and Twitch go into this house where this guy is laying on the floor close up in the front of the page, his brain meat all splattered in blood on the ground. Honestly, kind of a killer page with Sam and Twitch looking over him.
Also, really fun to have them come in after. I think I had even said that in the episode about that scene where I was like, "Yeah, it's weird that like Sam and Twitch aren't here." I like, and you pointed out smartly that they are no longer police officers, so that is why they're not there. But in this case, it's kind of fun to have them there, and then to also sort of justify why they're there. That they were sort of
Right.
called in extra because of
Because
the woman that we met in the last issue.
Right. So I like where Twitch says Mr. Bird has been permanently relieved of the back of his head due to the force entry frontally of a bullet,
I like
which
to think
is
he's saying it sarcastically to
exactly
Sam.
like that's how Twitch makes his jokes. Is he's so dry that he says like he was relieved of the back of his skull. Um, but yeah, this is the husband of the woman who came to see them, who has been paying their bills with her frequent visits about aliens that have been stalking her. And they kind of debate about what was going on here. They find her locked in the back room where she's watching TV, smoking a cigarette. I love this whole sequence of from where they go into the door, and one of the cops is saying to Twitch, "How can you be sure she's not armed?" And it opens, and there's just pitch blackness, and you see them from behind, and it says, "She will be." But there's no reason for her to use it again. She's been cleansed. And you see, like, the gun laying on the bed. You see Night Train whiskey which is maybe the best kind since Old Granddad, and the long ash of this cigarette that shows you exactly what kind of night she's having. Sam and Twitch consulting each other, and then you see, I love this image of her all hunched over. Shh, she looks great. The cartooning here from Greg Capullo is again a masterpiece, and I love that she's watching X-Files, and you can just barely tell on the TV that's what it is.
I don't think you can just barely tell. I think it's obvious. But
Well, okay, you only see like a small part of the logo.
one of the things that doesn't work here, though, and this is part of the because we're connoisseurs of Spawn context. One of the things
Spawn text.
we're spawnosaurs of Spawn text.
Spawn text, yes.
All right.
Spawnosaurs. How have we never done that one before?
Because we're spawnographers. Wow. But anyway,
it's true. But as spawnographers, we kind of are spawnosaurs. So please go ahead.
We've tried to parse the timeline a lot, right? Now, we know that the book starts in 1992. However, we know that each issue has been like sometimes a day, sometimes an hour, sometimes a week.
There's a little fudging of the timeline to catch it up to like modern day.
But wait, we also find out then hard dates on certain things, even though this issue comes out in 1998. This comes out in January of 1998. It can't be earlier than 1995. There's no way that she knows that there's an X-Files movie coming out. It's impossible. It's impossible. And I'm going mostly by the age of Cyan.
Right. Fair enough. Like I said, there's some real fudging of the timeline to get from the fact that Spawn launched in 1992 and it's now been 5 years since then in real world time, but not in Spawn's time. It's definitely some sliding timeline bullshit. And we'll forgive that because Peter Parker has been 23 for 65 years.
He's 29. He'll never get older.
For 65 years. So
I will say, yeah, I agree with you that these pages rule. The inking is incredible. The coloring is awesome. The neon greens are not.
We haven't talked about the colors much yet.
We haven't.
They're really good on these two issues. They're page
better on the second issue, I think.
This page is just this whole sequence.
Here's the thing: that eerie green really lends itself to Spawn, and it rules. I love all the Sam and Twitch stuff. It's really good. They don't really get anywhere.
Here's another timestamp for you. She says it's true. Pretty soon the world will know. They'll believe. Close Encounters, Aliens, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Contact. They're all true. Even Mars Attacks in a couple scenes. So she had seen Mars Attacks.
Mars Attacks was already cards, though.
Well, she says she names a bunch of movies.
Yeah, but you could argue that maybe...
They actually debate whether she's actually crazy or not, too.
Yeah.
Whether she's insane or whether she is all doing a carefully calculated scheme to make everyone believe she thought her husband was an alien, and in order to claim his life insurance after serving a minimum of jail time on an insanity defense. Sam and Twitch debate this. They come to the conclusion that unless there's some weird discrepancy in his finances, she is not calculating enough to actually be doing that kind of a scheme.
Right. And partly because they do need her to keep paying them.
That's also true.
That is part of their own calculus.
So they get in the car, and who should appear but none other than Cagliostro? What does he have in his hand?
A file.
A file. All the files, in fact.
Everybody take a drink.
On the lady's husband, Mr. Bird's complete files. So he says, here you go. It doesn't matter how I got these. What matters is we got to go help Spawn right now. He says he's found himself into a part of the alley that is controlled by a power far greater than he is. He's weak there, vulnerable, and now his ignorance has betrayed him. Our ignorance, too, because unless he's in some place where he's walking around like there are no Hulkamaniacs here, it's not hot, what greater power could there be than...
So I have not read ahead, but I have read more recent Spawn comics, and my thought here was, oh, this is a dead zone.
Which makes probably some sense.
Yeah.
But we'll find out about that in a little bit.
Next week.
Same Spawn time, same Spawn channel. They all rush off because the guys, John and his goons, are kind of gloating over Spawn's corpse. They're just straight up palming his necroplasm. They say, what is this guy made of? And they're in some nice green textured lettering where Zukowski lets us know, Necroflesh. Great band name. Probably is. It says nearly a quarter ton of it. It's been a while since we were reminded that Spawn is made of 250 some odd pounds.
No, 500.
500 some odd pounds. That's right. A quarter again. My brain makes bad associations with numbers.
Tons are dumb because they're 2,000 pounds.
Right. It's another of our perfect American weights and measures.
You know, like how we have one word for 12?
That's right.
And no other words for different numbers?
Nope. Anyway, we were reminded again of how heavy and nasty Spawn is. He's made of my favorite thing, 500 pounds of slime. And they're dragging him around. They take him into another part of the alley. John looks weirdly pleased with himself as he scoops up some of the necroplasm into a bag. And they run up, and it turns out that John Leakley is his name. I didn't look up to see if what team John Leakley was a defensive lineman.
John Leakley is an executive producer and writer on the HBO original series Spawn.
Makes perfect sense given how HBO this seems to be.
Also the creator,
serial killer,
writer, executive producer of Kindred the Embraced.
Oh, hell yes. Do you know what that is?
No.
Okay, Kindred the Embraced is the TV show based on Vampire the Masquerade.
What?
It ran for one season live action on Fox. I was actually just watching this not long ago.
The Spawn show is good?
Yes.
Because they got everything that should have influenced Spawn, but didn't. And then Spawn came out and they were like, we could make this better.
Dude, Vampire the Masquerade, I don't know if you've played it at all, but
I'm aware of it, but explain it for our listeners.
For our listeners, it was the role-playing game of the 90s, the tabletop pen and paper role-playing game that is also played in a function called Mind's Eye Theater that's sort of a semi-LARP. It became infamous because teenagers were supposedly influenced to murder by it. There was one kid, I read the book about it, I can't remember his name, but he murdered his girlfriend's parents because they were supposedly in a vampire cult that was influenced by live action Vampire the Masquerade role playing. The connection's a little tenuous, but they did play it.
Is this where because when I was growing up, and again, I've established that I grew up in a very religious household.
Mm-hmm.
I was not allowed to engage with Dungeons and Dragons as a child because my dad said oh yeah, those people go into the tunnels.
Okay.
They go into the subway and kill people.
That your mind is about to be fucking blown, and the next time we hang out, you're gonna. Okay, I'm gonna do a quick 30-second explanation of the 80s Satanic Panic. Satanic Panic was a religious fervor in the late 70s, early 80s through maybe the early 90s in the US. It happened in other decades sequentially in other places where people came to believe that the satanic influence over children of pop culture was so great that it was causing them to kill themselves and other people. There's so much more to it. I'm simplifying it down so much. A lot of people were basically brainwashed by their parents and psychologists into believing that they were abused by Satanists. There were so many murders that were blamed on Satanists. The West Memphis 3 is a satanic panic. But the Dungeons and Dragons part comes from, first off, the fact that it is just a fantasy thing with spells and wizards and demons and dragons and shit. The thing your dad was referencing was a story that did take place where a guy ran away from home and was found later dead in some tunnels. There was a tangential connection to Dungeons and Dragons, that he had played Dungeons and Dragons, and some people believed it led to his isolation, that led to him, I believe, taking his own life. That was adapted into a movie called Mazes and Monsters, starring Tom Hanks, in which Tom Hanks's character becomes so obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons and so depressed by the death of his brother that he leads some kids into the tunnels below his university to play Dungeons and Dragons, where it becomes so real that he almost stabs someone with his knife, with a letter opener dagger that he has. He then goes on to run away from school, climb up to the top of the Twin Towers, almost jump because he believes he can fly with a flying spell, is saved at the last minute. And he goes on to live in isolation with his parents, who he believes are innkeepers that he is staying with because he has a magic coin that replenishes every day. So your dad saw Mazes and Monsters on TV in 1988 or 84 or whatever it was, and was so whipped up by the religious fervor of true satanic panic that he was like, my kids are never playing Dungeons and Dragons. I have no idea what your dad sounds like, but was so whipped up into such a fervor that he truly believed that would happen if you played Dungeons and Dragons. That's incredible. What a diversion we've just made. We're going to watch that movie next time
we absolutely have to, because I didn't even know that existed.
That's incredible. So just to move on back to Vampire the Masquerade, it was a very edgy, hip 90s thing. I played a lot of it as a teenager and beyond.
Feels like it was for goths, and goths were too cool for me.
It is a super goth role-playing game. The art's incredible. I actually later went on to know some folks who worked on it. Great folks. Incredible game. But Vampire the Masquerade influenced, that was the basis for the TV show Kindred the Embraced, which was based on the characters in the world of Vampire the Masquerade. Another movie heavily influenced by Vampire the Masquerade, to the point where there's at least an urban legend that there was a lawsuit, and there may have been, between World of Darkness, White Wolf, the publisher, and Guillermo del Toro over Blade 2, because the imagery of the different types of vampires in Blade 2 is so specifically influenced by Vampire the Masquerade.
Here's the thing. Guillermo del Toro, based on what I've heard just now, that man played Vampire the Masquerade.
Absolutely he did.
No way he didn't.
No way he didn't. I'll show you the book and you'll be like, yeah, this is pretty specific. So anyway, that's our diversion from me explaining why Kindred the Embraced, a lost 90s show that you can't watch. I'm thinking unless you have the VHS, which my roommate does, and we have recently watched. Anyway, yeah. So that's who this
That's
episode
who John is, who's just shot the shit out of Spawn.
Yeah, he sure did. We're going to have to breeze through a little bit here because everyone in the alley from all different parts of Rat City, the different points, are coming together for a gang war.
Yeah.
As they've all heard that Spawn has been shot dead. And some guy, Tony, comes out of the woods with his gang, out of the alley, I meant out of the woodwork with his gang, and kills poor what's his name here.
Is his name Eric?
Eric, yeah. The religious guy. They just beat him down. Bobby and Bootsy have a terrible moment where Bobby, who's basically got nothing left after the shattering of his one keepsake of his family, is like, we're on the warpath. We're going to go kill them all. We're hooking up with, what's he say, Victor and Samuel's crews, and they have guns. Are you coming or not? And Bootsy is like, I can't. This isn't my fight. I'm not going. And then he says, you're no friend of mine. I have nothing in common with cowards. God, this is so heartbreaking. Not Bobby and Bootsy.
Yeah, Bobby and Bootsy breaking up is rough, but I like that it's Bootsy the one that is the one that's not going to go. Because like
Yeah,
Bobby had his thing, his like kind of the one thing holding him together shattered,
yeah,
and
literally.
he's like ready to fight, right? But like
Yeah.
Bootsy's like, I don't, I don't really want any of this. It's bringing a lot of nuance that we've not had from characters in Spawn before, and
We
it's really great. And also, inking on these on that page is really great.
we went without Bobby and Bootsy for a long time through a lot of issues
And
where
I
Spawn was
lamented it.
avoiding the night people. We have, and gosh, this is heartbreaking to see them falling out. So we get back to John, and he's meeting up with none other than the
The
freak. The freak!
freak, the freak.
Who we haven't Freakazoid, who we haven't seen in quite a while. This 2-page scene is really cool, where Johnny is gloating over the kind of necro cum that he's got a bag full of green jizz that he is really excited about. It is electric snot. It is like,
Looks great.
yeah,
I hate
and
one panel in this, which is the one where Freak sticks a finger in his eye, or a yeah,
you hate eye stuff.
I
We
really
were
hate it.
just talking about that, which sucks because that's a really awesome
It's
panel.
a great
Like
panel.
a great panel of something that I know you're truly squicked out by.
Yeah,
Mm.
not a fan. But in this format, it's not as bad.
So basically, yeah, Johnny tells Curse, I almost said Curse, Freak, that they strung Spawn up, his body up, a few alleys away in Bowery, um, where they just left it hanging. And Curse, or I keep saying Curse, Freak is like,
Freak!
the freak is like, you malignant insect. I'm the king here. You follow my orders. You obey. And he says, your friend's bleeding out because he didn't obey my orders. Spawn is mine. You're supposed to bring him to me. And they all are just grim faced as he kind of like leaves their friend bleeding out in front of them from being stabbed in the eye. And he says, both sides already know what you've done. They already know you've killed Spawn. Heaven and hell both know, and they're on their way. And whatever comes next is going to be a bloodbath. Soon, their 200 will be surrounded by our 2,000. So, Freak's been building an army for a while, it seems. And we get another shot of this nasty, gnarly, squicky slime.
Yeah. And it does lead us to our final page, which is Spawn headless, strung up against the wall. Although, I will say it does look like his chains are kind of holding him up.
He might
And
be
it,
strung up by his chains, much
well,
like.
yeah, they might have tied him up with his chains. And it just the freak saying, you see, they lack the one thing they need the most, a leader. And once you remove the head from any group, the body dies soon after. To be continued.
And I love this page of Spawn. All the cool garbage and rats in the foreground. Headless Spawn looks sick here. It really does. This is why I kept saying Curse, because this looks a lot like when he strung up the Curse by Curse's own like wires and shit, and like
It,
all the parts of his arm.
it's funny. We have the most fun when like Spawn's just getting like blown apart.
There's something I've really come to appreciate in recent years about a superhero who just gets like torn apart and keeps going.
Are you a big
Like
Terror Inc. fan?
Terror Inc. is pretty fun.
Terror
Pretty
Inc.
fun.
rules. Listeners, if you don't know Terror Inc., his brain is in his torso, so he can rip off his arms, legs, and head and just be anything that's not his
He's like a
torso,
weird
basically.
zombie guy. Yeah.
Yeah, he's cool as hell.
He's a lot like, honestly, a lot like Darkman in terms of his visuals.
Yeah. He's like if Deadpool was better, personally.
I was going to say that's one thing I really liked about Deadpool and Wolverine was they just tore each other apart. You finally got to see Wolverine like go through the fucking blender. And there's just something compelling to me about a character who gets blasted apart and takes these physical lumps and comes back from it. And maybe it's as I've gotten older and my body's gone through a lot of shit. There's something about that. I'm a fan of body horror overall, and there's something about a body horror superhero who's with the regeneration and shit. There are times when Spawn goes into that, like here, I think, in some ways that really work for me. We've talked about it before. Again, calling out the curse. That scene where he gets all taken apart and pulls himself together in his costume. Mwah, loved that. Premium Spawn. So yeah, we do like Spawn getting shit on and torn apart and ripped up and blasted and fucking, because he always comes back and he kind of also gets to kick a little ass. Sometimes I don't like a character that takes too many lumps. I like Invincible. Okay, I kind of like the show more than the comic, but he just always loses. He always gets his ass kicked, and he almost never gets to do anything like of his own in return. And I like when that Spawn, he's going to grow his head back or pick it up or something here. We know that.
Yeah. Or maybe his hand will get cut off and go find it or whatever, right?
Whatever, exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, it puts him in a precarious position. And if you're trying to sell monthly comics, that's exactly what you want. I'm going to get into the spawning ground a little bit here
Yeah.
before we get into our final thoughts. In Spawn 67, we have this first letter that I'll read the whole thing because it's an okay one. Dear Spawning Ground, after being a fan of Spawn from day one, I've come to expect the best from Todd and his wonderful, wonderful creation. I'm glad to say that I have received no less an amazing thing in this day and age. My question, however, is this. Why, when one can see the appeal and sense of an ongoing story such as told in the pages of Spawn and in other media as well, I'm a fan of television show Babylon 5.
Okay.
Do other
Nerd
artists
alert.
and storytellers not follow Todd and JMS's lead? Why do they continue to write the silly, one-shot stories people have come to get over the years? If I wanted to read stories with no ongoing threads, no ongoing story, no real meaning, I would buy the overpriced and overmarketed comics. I buy Spawn for the story, for the ongoing wonder that unfolds in the pages before me. I can't imagine purchasing another comic unless it fulfills what I've come to expect from a great story like Spawn, Babylon 5, and like Ghost for that matter.
Okay.
It is a pity that more people in the comic industry cannot see that an ongoing story will find you more dedicated fans than any silly hack and slash fight ever will. I used to buy the X-Men comics when there was only one because it had a story. That is no longer there, and neither am I. I am proud to be a supporter of Spawn and other stories that provide meaning and interest to the readers. Heck, I even own a toy or two. And while I was somewhat disappointed with the movie, one cannot tell the story of Spawn in only 2 hours, in my opinion. I still went to see it and enjoyed myself. As for the animated series, I purchased it after a single viewing. It is incredible. Keep up the good work. Darren Weston.
So that's the name of my enemy. First off, interesting that he brought up Todd McFarlane and JMS as like the two top storytellers. I want to say this is before JMS has like really got into his comics run and stuff. He had done some like Masters of the Universe mini comics in the
Yeah,
80s
he
with
had.
like Paul Dini and Bruce Timm, which I like those better than anything else he's done since. I am, okay. I'm just going to say I'm not a JMS fan. I don't find his writing to be the pinnacle of sequential storytelling. I think his recent Captain America run
Awful.
unfucking readable.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all. That's all I have to say. I think it's funny that he got brought up when we were talking about One More Day earlier and like the similarities with Spawn. But yeah, that's all. I also like done in one stories. I don't think comics should be an either or medium.
I don't. I am very confused by this reader who likes the X-Men, but only likes when the X-Men were one book. When
Chris
the X-Men
Claremont.
as one book, that's only like a couple of. I mean, I guess that's what, like 7 years of X-Men is Chris Claremont. At this point, it had been what? It's 1997.
It's
It had
more
been
than seven
six.
for Chris Claremont. He wrote the entire 80s
No,
part of
no,
the
no.
set.
But I'm saying while it was one book, we didn't get a second ongoing until New Mutants, didn't we?
Okay, fair, but I guess I was
Like if
taking it
like
as
he
like
was saying
X-Men and Uncanny X-Men. But that's fair if we take it all the way back and maybe think of
he's
like,
saying that I only liked X-Men when it was one book. Okay, so that's before New Mutants.
well, if we count, I guess the question is, and we're debating a 30-year-old letter, is he talking about
Classic X-Men.
comics with X-Men in the title or comics in the X-Men sphere? Because 1991 is when we got adjectiveless X-Men alongside Uncanny X-Men, which seems to
True.
track. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It's not a very big window. I mean, I guess it's a bigger window than most anything else, but like it's very nitpicky in the 90s to be like, I love Spawn. I hate the X-Men.
Yeah,
Because
very
let's be
weird.
honest, there's the not I'm taking nothing away from either one by saying in many ways they're often really of the same caliber.
Yeah. And I also have to the reason I threw him back as like an old head is that I was like, there wasn't one X-Men book for a really fucking long time. But
Also,
other letter writers have been like, I've been out of comics for a really long time and I'm back
also
now.
true.
So,
Who knows?
that's kind of weird.
But I don't like his like if it's not fucking Babylon 5 and it's not Spawn, I don't give a fucking dick. Like we have different taste in some things. Obviously Spawn I love. I would hold that up as a pinnacle of 90s comic storytelling in many ways. But Babylon 5, brother.
Hey, Babylon 5's got some moments.
It's
And also, listen, I'm a JMS Amazing Spider-Man defender until a certain point because the art's really good
mm.
and I like him being like a high school teacher. I think that's fun. I am also very much a JMS Thor defender.
Okay,
And
JMS is a story I did like. That's the
I
diamond
mean,
in the rough
issue
of
3
his
where he beats
career
the
for me.
shit out of Iron Man
Yeah, really good.
fucking
Isn't
rules.
that
And
where he dents fucking Silver Surfer in one issue too?
yeah, and
Olivier
also
Coipel.
Olivier Coipel is one of my favorite artists of all time. And one of the best Thor moments is him beating the shit out of Iron Man to the point where his armor does not work. He destroys everything on his person, basically. And he just says, well, how am I supposed to get home? And Thor walks away and goes, walk. Like, he just is like, I do not care. You tried to fucking clone me. It was just a really great cathartic moment after
Yeah,
Civil War where that Thor needed to like reestablish himself as like an A-lister. And it was awesome.
it's a bummer that JMS ditched that run in its like last moments.
Although we got Kieran Gillen.
Kieran Gillen, I was gonna say not his best work, but he was also trying to make fucking pizza out of a shit pie,
Yeah.
and it did lead to him working at Marvel, which was great. So
Yeah. Young
anyway,
Avengers. Anyway,
yeah,
issue 68 has one other very good is relative, but fun letter that says, Dear Todd, I'm so sorry that you got popular. In January 1995, I was in my local comic book shop buying a few Marvel titles that were really getting stupid, and I was looking for something new. Something on the racks caught my eye. It was a copy of Spawn 27. I like that a lot of letter writers have to give him like the fan fiction of them reading their first Spawn
Something on the
comic.
rack caught my eye. A lot of people say that, and I just picture them like casually wandering through, their eyes a gaze each side, just like, huh?
I recognized it from the toy I had gotten that Christmas. The cover depicted Spawn lying down with his green guts splattered across the wall behind him. I bought
Hell
it.
yeah.
The art was amazing and the story was very intriguing. I started collecting them and soon bought all the previous ones at comic book conventions. It was the most well written comic I had ever laid my eyes on. However, that soon began to change.
Oh no.
In issue 32, the costume changed. This was the first step towards your downfall. The
What?
costume was so armored and spiked, and it was so pop culture. It's as if big muscles, big guns, and big breasts are all you need to sell a comic. The
Hold
costume
on a
lacked
second.
the costume lacked the spirit it originally had. After Blood Feud was over, you let those pitiful artists who had been drawing it draw your comic every other issue, and you went twice a month. Big mistake. All caps. The writing was lower than dog shit, but spelled in a censored way.
Grawlix.
That's what it is. Thank you. And you and Greg got lazy with the drawing as well. You were just passing time. It sucked. Nothing happened. 3 exclamation points, all caps. Your comic was crap and you let it go down the tubes. You knew that people would buy your comic even though it sucked because you were popular and that's all you cared about. I found it very insulting. In issue 50, something finally happened. Which means also, he kept buying the book. But this is
We
fine.
kept doing the podcast.
That's true. You sent Spawn to hell. This set up the next few issues to be very interesting, and they were. You weren't going twice a month anymore, and you got rid of those bad alternative artists, so that helped the writing and art a lot. In issue 60, Violator informs Spawn that Chapel wasn't the one who killed him, and in the next issue, Spawn is thinking about that, and it shows a picture of Jessica Priest. I thought it was cool how Chapel was the one who killed him. Why do you want to change that? It's fine not to use him in the movie because you have to pay that Liefeld dumb shit lots of money. By the way, shit there, not censored. However, you didn't have to do that in the comic. Jessica Priest isn't nearly as cool as Chapel, especially in Curse of the Spawn 12 when she says all of these friggin' 3-year-old lines as she's killing people. That was just plain stupid. Last Wednesday, I picked up a copy of issue 65 and it was awesome. You fixed most of your problems here. The story is very entertaining and the art was incredible. I especially liked how Sam was such a hard ass. He's been a real pussy lately, and I'm quoting there.
Wow.
And he really needed an attitude. He was so cool, and I congratulate you on making such a cool comic. There are a few solid things for you to write about now. Spawn's face is deteriorating again. Sam and Twitch know what's going on, and Spawn found out that Jessica Priest really killed him. For the first time in a long time, I'm really looking forward to the next issue.
Well, this guy learned to write from Todd McFarlane based on how much he just recapped shit that happened in issues of Spawn he's read. I want to hear the Todd Father's response if there is one. But first off, what was his checklist? Big guns. Okay, I'll give him that. Chains, definitely. Spawn's got that.
Big muscles.
Big muscles, 100%. Big boobs.
Big breasts. Yeah.
Sorry.
Breasts,
big breasts. What comics is he reading where Spawn has big titties? Because
no, not
I want
Spawn
that comic.
Not Spawn himself, but I guess the comic.
Oh. Well, they should have done that variant.
They
Busty
have
Spawn.
that. It's Scorched.
No, I don't.
Scorched is
I don't
Spawn
want a different
with big titties.
Okay.
It's just Jessica Priest still.
Okay, fine.
Is the new Spawn.
It's like if Hulk had tits. Not She-Hulk. That I want
Fair.
Hulk with tits.
Todd says, when you have a book like Spawn that's been running nonstop for over 5.5 years, you'll find that there are ebbs and flows to everything. Some of the character choices might not be to your liking, nor some of the artistic choices, though in 68 issues, there's only been 6 issues that Greg or I haven't done. There's no way we're going to please the entire readership every month. To tell you the truth, I'm not necessarily happy with every issue from month to month. On some levels, that's what makes us continue doing the books. We're trying to find that magical formula and get us on the elusive perfect issue, even though you hope you never do, because after that, anything you do will be less than your best issue. As for the Chapel incident, I've never shown in the comic book that Chapel was the one that killed Spawn, which is actually true. It was in Spawn's mind that was showing that. Even though Rob and I had a falling out of late and I decided to go in a different direction, it doesn't actually mess up any previously established continuity that has been seen.
Sure.
So there's that.
All right. Well, thanks.
I like these two issues. I like them more because I got to talk about them with you. But
Yeah.
I like them. I guess that brought out that I like them more. These are my final thoughts. I like them more
These
than
are my final thoughts.
than I thought I would. And you know what? I'm excited for the next two because we're gonna get the sort of payoff, right? So, George, what are your final thoughts?
I think as much as readers or listeners, who I hope are also readers of Spawn, will find it funny that we did a thing we sometimes do where we spent so much time talking bullshit about the first issue that we kind of breezed through the second one. But that's often how these arcs are set up, where there's so much setup and talking and dialogue. And then when you pull all the threads together, it kind of whips together really fast with a lot of the pacing
Yeah.
and the events of the comic. I think this is a pretty readable 2 issues, especially considering how kind of ugly there are a couple spots in there. But the art looks great throughout it. The coloring has some really incredible spots. And lately, Todd has been finding some really great ways to really wring the emotion out of Spawn and to really find those human moments that define what this comic really actually is about. And I think that first issue where we get that whole discussion, I think that's one of those moments for this comic that really is great.
It's kind of one of those resets that we've seen in the letters column, but we haven't seen on the page of the
Right.
book. And it's really cool to see it between Spawn and the Night People and just characters in general, which is really, really cool.
And see some movement coming. I'm also excited to get into the next episode because we'll be covering Spawn 69.
Nice.
And I think that is going to be really successful with our Gen Z listeners.
Before we close out altogether, George, do you have any recommendations for the folks at home?
Let's see. I'll give 2 quick ones. First off, while I was in New York, I saw the movie The Substance, and I think you should 100% see that movie, no question. Don't learn anything about it. Just go and see it if it's still in a theater near you or rent it. The other thing I'll say is this week I've been doing some drawing. I've always been an artist. That's something I do a lot. I've just been drawing on paper with a pencil, which is something I haven't done in recent years. I've gotten really comfortable drawing mostly on a tablet, and it's been really fun doing this tactile thing again, even though I do keep reaching over to the left side of the paper like there's going to be an undo button there. So my other recommendation will be go back to something that really makes you happy and maybe find a way to push your comfort zone in it. And that's it.
I love that you always come with some existential recommendations or some larger than life recommendations. I'm going to recommend what I said I recommend at the beginning of the podcast, which is Wizards, the podcast guide to comics, which is the podcast about Wizard magazine. They recently had Garib Sheamus on.
Wow.
They have about 100 episodes. Some of them longer than others, but they're shorter than us typically, around an hour. But definitely check them out. They're folks that we'd love to have on one day. If you know them, let them know that
Yeah.
or you already listen to them. Let them know that we've been thinking about them. If you want to follow our show, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can find us on the internet, on Threads, on Blue Sky, and Instagram as well, at Spawnography or at Spawnography Pod, or whatever the Blue Sky version of that is. But if you search us, you'll find us. Send us an email at spawnographypod@gmail.com. Please rate, review, subscribe. It really, really, really helps the show. We got one more 5-star review today on Apple
Oh,
Podcasts. That made me really happy. Thank you to whoever did that. You didn't write a review, so I can't shout you out. But if you write a review, we will. And yeah, we'll see you next week, I guess. George, for Todd so loved the world,
he gave his only begotten Spawn.
See you later, Hellspawn.